a lot of this up at the top of that draft, you're getting thrown in with teams that are trying to rebuild.
It's really hard to, and I think not just being a New England fan, but for anybody to look at this team's quarterback situation last year and think that any quarterback coming in is going to be a bust. But I do understand what he's saying. First-year head coach for Mayo, not really having the weapons around him, not knowing what else the draft is going to look like for them. It's not a good situation for J.J. McCarthy, but is he going to be a bust senior? I don't know if that's the right word to use for this.
Oh, that's tough to call a bust right out of the gate. But what he has said and what I have said and what we've seen, the sampling size is there. There are going to be 5 quarterbacks and 2 or 3 are going to bust. And I can't sit here and pick which ones are going to bust. I don't know that, but time has told us that's going to happen. We both have thought J.J. McCarthy has been moving. We were surprised it was first round. Now the projections are Minnesota trading up to get this guy in the top 5. I still don't see it as much as others do. But listen, I've been right about some quarterbacks. I've been wrong about some quarterbacks. Kind of just like the teams have been over the years, is you pick ones you think are going to hit and ones that you're not sure about. J.J. McCarthy has been a guy I've not been sure about.
J.J. McCarthy is a guy that's going to need a little bit more time. I think that's what we all imagine. It's a reps problem. There's ability there, and that's what's enticing to people, but it's a reps problem in the areas of quarterback, mainly having to throw the ball a ton, that are going to be the difference maker. And what I agree with Colin, I think, Claudia, there's a reaction to the word bust, because in my mind, bust implies the player failed. And what Colin's talking about here, and I think what most of us have had a larger conversation about more lately, is no, this is a situational bust. This is a team that is not capable of bringing in and has to be honest with the kind of player they can bring in at this point in their life cycle as a team. And so at that point, I think he's right. I do think Minnesota is much more capable of bringing in a player like J.J. McCarthy, because you've got a Sam Darnold there, maybe using that to help wean that player into it, knowing, hey, I got one of the best receivers in the NFL, if not outright the best wide receiver in Justin Jefferson, who's a hell of a security blanket for a young player in an offense that's also a branch of the Shanahan-McVay stuff that is pretty quarterback solvent and helps these guys out early, versus New England, where this is all going to be new for them and they don't have a roster that's nearly as ready, much like we saw with Carolina last year, to support a young quarterback.
But we also saw Houston. Did we think Houston had a rookie top defensive lineman of Will Anderson, the number 2 quarterback? They didn't have a running game. Did we think Tank Dell and Nico Collins were going to do what they did as well? You had a first-time head coach and you had a first-time play caller as well. And they surprised. I'm not sitting here and saying New England's going to do that, and we saw Carolina go the other way on that. That's why I keep saying Houston's the exception to the rule, but other owners see that and say, if it happened there, why can't it happen here? Because you're right. You look at Houston and you say, well, they just don't have the weapons. But before the season started last year and we were breaking down divisions, did anybody have Houston winning it? And was anybody saying, you know what, they could surprise with the talent that they have? No, none of us were saying that. And yet they still did it.
Yeah, you know who Houston didn't have in the division? The Bills, Dolphins, and Jets.
I agree. I completely agree.
Part of that is shame on us for, I think, not looking closely enough at that Houston roster maybe going into last year. And you're right. But also, this bears repeating, J.J. McCarthy is not CJ Stroud. Not comparable prospects. Not talked about in the same way in the lead up to this, Claudia. At least in my mind, the way we talked about CJ and the way that we're talking about J.J., and that's the point that I think Colin was making about Caleb Williams, is CJ is much more in that mold of a quarterback than he is a guy like J.J. McCarthy.
Well, that too, and I'm thinking back to Senior's comment on Tank Dell. In my eyes, it's almost like that was a fresh start for that team. There was a lot of young talent there. We didn't know what the ceiling looked like. It appeared to be, it did. It was a lot higher than we thought. The issue with the New England is they brought back all of these players where we sort of already know the situation with them, and they didn't look good last year. And, Pop Douglas was your best receiver, which was wildly concerning. Hunter Henry, your tight end, basically was your most reliable receiver. Like, we know that's what we're getting again this year. So I think that was the biggest concern for me. I was high on the Texans. I was really high on CJ Stroud. I'm not going to, blow smoke on that one. But I did think the ceiling was higher with them, knowing what we were getting with New England.
Especially knowing their first-round picks, Will Anderson Jr., legitimate culture changer, defensive rookie of the year, all that stuff seemed accessible there. They had drafted well on the back end, Derek Stingley Jr. Tank Dell was someone that a lot of people were excited about, but I think overall it's also about trajectory. What they were coming off of was the remnants of a real bad time down there with Deshaun Watson, the end of that regime and that franchise there, the front office that had to get a lot changed over, versus New England that's coming off the greatest two-decade run maybe in the history of pro sports, and at the very least the NFL, and is having to sort through a swing and miss on their first-round quarterback with a roster, to Claudia's point, that doesn't stack up on paper.
My thought only is the team did better than we expected in Houston. They did better than we expected. I was just trying to give Claudia some hope. But I think New England is screwed. I think they're in a lot of trouble. I know. I was trying. Because it can happen occasionally, like it did with Houston. But it's ugly in New England.
This is what makes New England a very interesting trade back candidate.
Yes,
I understand. It sounds like they're going to stick there. It sounds like, from what we've heard from Gerard Mayo publicly, which could be a smokescreen, could be all that. You're in Marvin Harrison Jr. range if you want to continue to build out for the future. But it makes them a very interesting that third spot overall. And I think this is also, too, an interesting larger conversation around the things that benefit young quarterbacks the most. When we look at Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Caleb Williams, we've talked so much about the environment in Chicago that he's going in. You look at other quarterbacks that have had successful rookie season. You think Dak Prescott, you think RG3, Andrew Luck, Russell Wood, the ones that are like the premier ones of the last decade, and the things that have been commonalities there. I mean, with Dak Prescott, you're talking about 2016 Dallas offensive line, probably the best in that iteration of the Cowboys. And you had rookie Zeke Elliott coming in, too. That was one of the better rushers in the league right there. CJ Stroud, we talked about all the pieces that came together. I think largely protection-based, too. Russell Wilson coming into Seattle with the Legion of Boom burgeoning on the other side of the ball. Like, you can look back and start to see, all right, here are some things that helped other young players be successful. Which of these teams that we're talking about near the top actually have some of those parts that might be able to mimic that?
Yeah. And some of those you get top picks, and others, like a Russell Wilson or Dak Prescott, remember, they weren't first-round guys.
Yeah, exactly.
So they were able to go to better teams or had better, stackable things for them. And you look at the first four teams here, they're all building. I mean, the Bears are building, but we think they're building well. Washington had a bunch of signings in the offseason. Again, a ton of pieces. They're throwing it all up against the wall to see what can stick together. Then New England is New England. We know how much they faltered since the Tom Brady era. And that, the Cardinals, they're not going to go quarterback. But if Minnesota trades up, we like that offense. And you have, your eyes sparkle if you're a quarterback saying, please let me go there because I have Justin Jefferson. So a lot of this up at the top of that draft, you're getting thrown in with teams that are trying to rebuild.
Yeah, so I do think Colin's right. I think in particular, J.J. McCarthy would be a bad fit for New England, but we know Minnesota's waiting in the wings arm with 2 first-round picks. We know the Raiders could still be in business here. We know the Broncos are going to still need a quarterback, and so there's all these contenders as we get later and later into this and get loaded up with mock drafts right now. They're going to make this home stretch before the NFL draft. We are now inside a month, folks. We made it. We are so close to the promised land, but that doesn't mean we are done speculating.